Kashif, we're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the New York City Public Advocates State of the People 2021. My name is Kashif Hussain, and I'm the Deputy Public Advocate for Infrastructure and Environmental Justice. Today, our team is very proud to be hosting these amazing panelists who will educate and engage us on the Green New Deal from the lens of local policy and activism. It goes without saying that climate change and the effects of climate change have begun to hit our communities in New York, and that these effects harm frontline, low-income, and communities of more color the most. As our office joins forces with activists and advocates leading the environmental justice fight, it is equally important for the people of New York City to join the movement. We can think nationally, but we have got to act locally. Talk about connecting the Green New Deal to municipal policy, local solution to global problems, the activism we need to keep up the pressure up to make it happen. As an example, our Renewed Deal report mentions public investment in energy generation via solar, wind, and storage, replacing existing fossil fuel infrastructure. Green jobs in impacted communities, shifting local policies and legislation to meet both the New York State's Climate Leadership Community Protection Act and New York City's Climate Mobilization Act in order for us to meet the 2050 climate goals. With this in mind, it is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished moderator, who is the Executive Director of New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. Eddie?
Thanks, Kashif. Good afternoon, all. I'm pleased to be here to introduce this rock star panel. Excuse me. Before we begin, just a couple of words. Green New Deal, many of you will know there's nothing new about a Green New Deal. The idea of transitioning from a fossil fuel dependent society to one that moves towards clean, renewable energy and that centers communities of color, low-income communities, and communities that have contributed the least to climate change. That concept, that context has been around for decades. We've called the movement, the environmental and climate justice movements, have long called this a just transition. So joining us today to talk about visions for just transition and some of the work, I will read off their names and turn over to the first speaker in a second. We are joined today by Sonal Jessel, the Director of Policy for We Act. Lee, I'm sorry, I just realized that they just pulled you up, Sonal. So I'll get to the other folks in a second. Sonal, before I turn it over to you, welcome, and feel free to jump in and we'll get started. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eddie, and thank you to Kashif and the Public Advocate for having me today. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the Green New Deal and local policy solutions. I can talk a little bit about We Act and what we do. We Act for Environmental Justice is a grassroots community-based organization based up in West Harlem. We've been organizing against environmental racism in Northern Manhattan since 1988, when our founders, including our current executive director, Peggy Shepard, were community organizing against toxins that were being spewed out in a wastewater treatment plant up in West Harlem that was placed there and considered an act of environmental racism. And since then, we've been working to create healthy communities for Northern Manhattan, which is Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood, through city, state, as well as federal policy work. We not only focus on our city policy, but we have a team in Washington, D.C. that focuses on how to achieve environmental justice nationally. So some of the things that we really focus on when it comes to the Green New Deal and this idea of a just transition, which is a very important framework for which we want to achieve our Green New Deal, of transitioning away from fossil fuels and moving into new industries that are centering communities that have been most impacted by climate change. They are also the communities that have been contributing the least to the problem, we found. So it's mostly communities of color, lower income communities that are whose neighborhoods are covered with environmental hazardous facilities, like we have uptown with bus depots and plants and train yards and throughways, but these neighborhoods also, due to historical racism, such as redlining, is something we talk a lot about, have fewer resources. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to be here, and some of the things that WeAct is focusing on when it comes to transitioning is good jobs and bringing up jobs in amongst communities of color that have been historically left out of climate change solutions. So one thing that we work really heavily on, and this is a lot of this work is spurred in response to Hurricane Sandy, that devastated a lot of part of northern Manhattan, such as East Harlem, part of Central Harlem. Also, East Inwood was really devastated through flooding, and that's an area that isn't really spoken enough about in terms of the flood risk. Those areas, it really scared people, made a lot of people, put into the forefront the fact that our houses, our neighborhoods are just not ready for extreme weather events that are coming as a result of climate change. And so in response to that, WeAct led the Northern Manhattan Climate Action Plan, which was over 400 residents that involved in a planning process to basically envision a better future for Northern Manhattan, what they want to see in the solutions to prepare and mitigate climate change. And one of the major things that came up was energy democracy, making sure that people have access to the energy that they need, that it's adequate energy access, that it's driven by renewable energy. It's not energy that is contributing to the issue, to climate change, and that it's something that people own, that they have power over, no pun intended. And also that the community is not only owning this power, not only controlling this power, but also trained in the industry to install the solar panels, to put up microgrids, to even maintain these technologies over time. And so that's something that WeAct has really jumped into with our Solar Uptown Now project, as well as our community power project, as well as a lot of policy we do that always just centers the need to grow jobs and grow renewable energy in our neighborhoods, powered by our neighborhoods. So that's something that WeAct is really focused on and thinks is a really big part of a Green New Deal, is not only bringing up communities that have been impacted through a lifetime of ownership over their energy and good jobs, but also it's addressing the need for addressing issues of unemployment, addressing issues of kind of how do we make sure that there's a lot of space in a new world for people that have historically not been given that space. So that's kind of one of the main things that we're focusing on. And then I'll just mention one other thing that we're considering a lot with the Green New Deal is with extreme heat. That's an issue that WeAct works really heavily on through our Heat, Health, and Equity initiative. We've partnered with a lot of organizations as well as researchers and city agencies to envision solutions to extreme heat in our city. We know that places such as Central Harlem have really high heat vulnerability index where the impacts of heat are just felt more, or they have a greater impact on the people living in the neighborhoods with high heat vulnerability. And that is very much a result of climate change, where extreme heat is rising in frequency and duration and severity. And we're seeing that it's the number one weather-related killer in the United States. It leads over 400 people a year to have hospitalizations, emergency room visits, or even death in New York City. That's projected to grow heavily if we do nothing about it. And so extreme heat is another major issue that our community members have brought to WeAct as something that is like something that's a major concern, and we want to find solutions for it. So WeAct works on the Heat, Health, and Equity initiative that's really focusing on how do we make sure we get adequate cooling in people's homes, but sustainable cooling particularly. We say sustainable cooling is a human right. We also are working on how do we make sure that people have access to cool places to cool down that are public, that are free. So that's improving our city's cooling center program. That's making sure that there's green space that is good quality in neighborhoods. We have a lot of environmental justice neighborhoods that have a lot of parks, but they're not as well maintained. They're not as big. They might be more concrete than grass. So we have to make sure that we're building that up a lot. So extreme heat is another big response, and it's really related to the job growth that we're working on. It's related to energy democracy because it's solving that issue of how do we make sure people are safe in these extreme weather events, and coming up with sustainable energy solutions, renewable energy solutions is really the most important way to do that. So I will end there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sonal. Appreciate it. Next up, I think we've been joined by all our panelists. The next up will be Council Member Antonio Reynoso. Council Member, how are you? Good to see you.
Nice to see you too, Eddie. And I just want to give a shout out to the interpreter, Brandon Kazimatics, who is killing it right now. I'll talk slowly to make sure that the folks can hear what we're saying or can see what we're saying. Thank you so much for having me here today. I think it's extremely important that we recognize the work that people from affected communities of environmental justice have done to elevate the issue of this Green New Deal that Eddie has talked about existed for a long time. I got into politics specifically because my district has 3 times the asthma rates as anywhere else in the city of New York. We handle 40% of the city's trash in one district. We have the 3rd least amount of park space as anywhere else in the city of New York. These compounded issues has made it so that our community has suffered greatly for a long time under policies that have been imposed by the city, state, and federal government. Being elected, I believe, has allowed for significant change to happen in these areas. Someone with experience and lived experience with social and environmental injustice are the type of folks that are going to be able to affect change in a meaningful way. I want to talk about one policy that we were able to pass and then speak on where the future lies. Waste zoning, which is one of Eddie's favorite things to talk about. As you know, Eddie is from Brooklyn, so he loves talking trash. The good thing that we've been able to do is figure out a way to remove 1 million miles of truck traffic in the city of New York over a yearly period once this legislation gets going. The value of that is, again, a reduction of not only truck traffic in a physical sense, but pollution that allows for our people to breathe healthier air. It is arguably the most significant piece of environmental justice legislation that we've been able to pass in the city of New York. And that comes from the work that advocates have done on the ground alongside elected officials that have lived experiences. It truly has been a difference maker in our ability to start addressing environmental justice, specifically in areas that haven't had a voice for a long time. Now the future. I want to talk about the built environment and the opportunity that we have with something called green jobs. For too long, people that have been affected haven't been a part of a solution-oriented process to get us out of this environmental justice hole that we're in. But green new jobs are definitely going to get us this opportunity. We need to have a just transition. We should be educating and training people to start doing the jobs of the future that are not only going to give us money in our pockets, which is extremely important, but also move us out of move us out of the environmental challenges that we have today. I don't want to talk anymore because I really want to get into a back and forth, not make this a lecture, but instead a conversation. I'm looking forward to the questions. We want to thank Jamani Williams and Eddie Bautista for introducing me here today and giving us an opportunity to speak. I actually have a hearing, a sanitation hearing right after this. So you might not see me immediately after. I would have to come back. I want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to be here. Peace, love, and justice.
Thank you so much, Councilman. I was about to give you my testimony for the hearing, but I guess I won't do that now. Next, we have, to make sure everyone's with me. Next, we have Zi Shi, Community Engagement Coordinator for Hussain Energy Project. Lee.
Hey, thanks so much. And thank you for the Public Advocate's Office for having me. Hussain Energy Project is a very small nonprofit. We only have 2 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff, but we've been around since 2011. And we were founded to fight one of the very first pipelines that was being built in 2011 to bring fracked gas from Pennsylvania into New York. And that's kind of been the mission of Hussain Energy, has been to fight fracked gas infrastructure, but also fight for a just transition. We're not looking to replace the current energy system with just a renewable energy system. We know we have so many problems with fossil fuels because of the way that that industry has been designed. It's based on capitalism, it's based on exploitation of frontline communities. And it's so important for us to have a Green New Deal, both on a federal level and in state policies, because I think a lot of people still don't understand how far New York is really from achieving our renewable energy goals. We banned fracking in 2014 in New York because of incredible grassroots pressure on Governor Cuomo. We have laws both at the city and the state level now, incredible climate laws, that were fought for by so many of the people that are, a part of this panel today, frontline environmental justice communities. But right now, what we're still seeing with our energy system is a failure, really, of our state and our city to listen to a lot of those laws. They're still letting a lot of fossil fuel infrastructure being built. And a lot of that is, in communities that these laws were specifically passed, to protect. So right now, Hussain Energy Project, we're fighting something called the North Brooklyn Pipeline. It is being built by National Grid. It starts in Brownsville, another community with very, very high asthma rates. And pretty much the entire pipeline is being built through, Black, Brown, Indigenous community, people of color communities against their will by National Grid. And one of the worst parts about it is National Grid wants us to pay for this. The way our current energy system works, our corporate utilities have an incredible amount of power over us. And the processes of determining, what kind of infrastructure is being built, how much we're paying for them, they're all incredibly undemocratic, right? Tomorrow I'm actually going to be in confidential settlement negotiations on whether or not National Grid can raise our rates to build this infrastructure. And that's not including these communities that are on the front lines, the ones who are having the pipelines that will be leaking dangerous frack gas, which also is not only a harm to these communities, but to the climate. There's really not a say right now. It's very difficult. Our energy process has just been so undemocratic. So I think, something Hussain Energy has been working towards that Sonal brought up that's so important is community ownership, and looking at how we're not only replacing dirty fossil fuels with renewables, but we're actually building a more democratic form of energy where we're not, beholden to a corporate utility like National Grid. Because it's not even just this pipeline. They're also looking to expand a frack gas storage facility on the banks of Newtown Creek. Every time you hear about these fossil fuel projects, they honestly sound like these evil villain plans, right? In Greenpoint, you have contaminated soil on Newtown Creek, which is also contaminated by decades and decades of industrial pollution. But that's where National Grid wants to continue to expand their gas storage, and it will connect to this pipeline. Another fight that we're very involved in is the fight to stop the Astoria fracked gas power plant. There's another energy behemoth named NRG that's looking to build a fracked gas power plant in Astoria, another community that has really suffered from decades of fossil fuel pollution. So, when we're looking at a Green New Deal, we're really thinking about, how do these communities that have suffered for so long from the pollution get healing? And, a lot of the communities that we've been working with along the North Brooklyn pipeline, very much want renewable energy and have been incredibly involved in getting renewable energy to their neighbors. We work with an amazing young man named Gabriel Jameson, who helped get 3,000 people in his community solar panels. So, that's to us what this looks like. And I think what's so important is, kind of breaking that facade that we sometimes get here in New York, right? That, obviously it's breaking a lot right now with Governor Cuomo. But for so long, I think we've been seen as this place that's leading. And yes, we are doing better than, say, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, where people are getting, fracked to death. But I think part of that will be making sure that these communities are at, the front line and at the table as we are developing things like a Green New Deal here on a federal level, on a state level, on a city level, and making sure that these communities that have been so harmed are at the table and that money is coming to people, right? If National Grid thinks we have $54 million to spend on new LNG vaporizers and, almost $200 million on a frac gas pipeline. That is all money that should be going directly to community for community-owned renewable energy. And so that's what, Sane Energy has been working on. And, we're just very excited to continue to work with people and just really appreciate the leadership of so many people from environmental justice communities that have really been leading this and looking forward to, more conversation with everybody.
Thank you, Lee. Next, last but not least, we have Elizabeth Diampier, Executive Director from Uprose, and also co-chair of the National Climate Justice Alliance, and a number of other hats, or rather headdresses, that she wears. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Ashe, gracias de corazón. It is a blessing to be here with all of you today. I thank you, Eddie, for that introduction, and I want to give special thanks to Public Advocate Jumani Williams, who really has been bold, visionary, and courageous. We won't forget that he stood with Frontline-led climate justice solutions for an industrial waterfront that builds for our climate future and not dated development built on the backs and future of our people. It's his willingness and the willingness of people like him to depart from compromising our future that is an example of the kind of governance that is demanded by climate change. We come to this work because we were born and raised in these communities. We are the front line of the climate justice movement. And we came to it because we were fighting for our right to breathe, because our communities were being turned into sacrifice zones, because environmental burdens were basically put in our communities. And we are the ones with the asthma, with the upper respiratory disease, the ones who are developing and are dying from COVID. Uprose has been in the community since 1966. We are a Black, Indigenous, and women of color led organization that works at the intersection of racial injustice and climate change. We believe that our people speak for themselves and that our people have power. And we have been working really hard for years, not only to stop the siting of power plants and engage in brownfield remediation and double the amount of open space and create pedestrian-friendly options, but to put down legislation to basically make it possible to operationalize a vision that really manifests what a just transition is. And if you've been following Uprose, you know that we are members of New York Renews, which is a statewide coalition of over 200 members that passed the most aggressive climate legislation in the country. We did that with the idea of moving funding and moving resources to frontline communities so that we can start building for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, so that we could start engaging in renewable energy and food sovereignty, all the things that for us are a model of a just transition. A just transition isn't just about renewable energy, it's also about food sovereignty, and it's also about our relationships with each other. The fact that we are trying to build a culture of practice that resembles the kind of future that we are trying to build, which means that frontline communities lead and speak for themselves and that we recommend the solutions. I came into this meeting today right after I co-chair the National Frontline Green New Deal table, and that was the meeting that I was on before we came to this. You know that in Sunset Park and in our community, not only were we able to stop the rezoning that Industry City was fighting for. It was an important rezoning because that was an example of what has been happening in our communities where developers have more power and they use industrial sectors that really are the things that are going to be the vehicle for the kinds of green jobs we're talking about that will take the region and put the region on a path to making it possible for our communities to thrive. That was an amazing victory. Being able to bring offshore wind to Sunset Park is also an amazing victory because we are looking at not only climate jobs, but we're also looking at how we can take advantage of all of the resources that are coming from the CLCPA, the Community Mobilization Act, the work that we've done with the Biden administration and with Senator Schumer to bring resources into densely populated areas that have a legacy of environmental racism and start not only addressing reducing carbon emissions, but reducing co-pollutants that have been killing our people for generations. So we are not only organizing and building community momentum, but we are also putting the infrastructure on the ground. Uprose has been not only responsible for leading a lot of these initiatives, but we also play a role in a lot of different coalitions that have been working diligently to do things like take down peakers. We're part of the Peak Coalition, which Eddie is part of the lead of, the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, which Uprose is a member of, looking at infrastructure and trying to figure out how do we replace it with something that is environmentally healthier and is going to address the problems that we're going to face in 10, 20, 30 years from now. You know that if you live in Brooklyn, that you have been getting used to having tornadoes in Brooklyn, and this is not Kansas. When a tornado lands in Brooklyn, it lands on something, and it is not normal for us to have tornadoes. So extreme weather events are here. You saw what happened with Hurricane Maria, with Superstorm Sandy, with Katrina. Those are all extreme weather events that are happening in communities of color, the communities least responsible for creating these problems. In Sunset Park, we launched the Sunset Park Community-Owned Solar Cooperative because not only are we invested in renewable energy, but ownership is important. It's important that our communities own the infrastructure. And so we're looking at those models, and those models do come from the just transition. I would urge you to go to the Climate Justice Alliance website if you want to learn more about what energy democracy is and deep democracy, if you want to learn more about what the path is to a just transition. And if you also want to learn about how we build just relationships and learn more about the Hermes principles. And I say this because what we're seeing is a lot of people who are really interested in the work that we're doing and trying to supplant local leadership and come into our communities and make decisions for us. Not only is that green capitalism, but that's colonialism. What it means is that as we become the majority, not only in the city, but in the country, our communities are going to be marginalized by people who think that they have the solutions and that they know what to do and that they know more what our community needs than we do. The grid, which is a recommendation that comes out of Uprose in our community, is a compilation of recommendations that come straight from the grassroots about the future they'd like to see in Sunset Park. That has to be honored, it has to be invested in, and it has to be operationalized. And we're really grateful to all the elected officials who have taken our back and who have supported us and who have demonstrated what a different kind of governance looks like. The Frontline Green New Deal is a little different because it makes sure that a Green New Deal is centered on racial justice and equity. We always say that is not a deal without us. And so we have played a major role in making sure that all the recommendations that are coming out of the Green New Deal and the Thrive Agenda are centered on solutions that are coming from Black, Indigenous, and people of color all over the country. That is tremendously important. When you take care of the people who are most vulnerable, you're basically taking care of everyone. So gracias, and thank you for the opportunity to be in community with you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And also thank you, Brandon, for hanging in there. He's been putting a yeoman's effort forth. So thank you. And welcome, Nora. So welcome all. Did we lose Councilmember Reynoso? I think so. So the question about the waste zones, I'll do a bad job of answering that. That's one of the first questions that was in the chat box. Commercial waste zones is a new law and a new system that the city of New York is moving in. For commercial waste historically has been handled by individual carters picking up from individual businesses in New York, which has meant it's been environmentally and economically it is a subpar system. It's one that's led to multiple garbage trucks picking up from the same franchise of businesses, say on the same block. So the commercial waste zone, rather than have each business in New York contract with specific carters and then have multiple carters serving the same block, New York City will be carved up into zones when there'll be the exclusive right to collect commercial waste in each one of these zones by anywhere from 3 to 5 carters, thereby radically reducing truck miles, radically reducing environmental impacts, increasing community and worker protections. So I'll stop there. I think we're waiting for 1 or 2 other questions while folks are loading them. Quick question for the panel. Before the People's Climate March, this movement was doing all kinds of tremendous things, everything from the first municipal brownfields law for a city in the country, a radical solid waste management plan that for the first time lifted environmental justice in the siting of facilities, even the New York State Power Act that for the first time mandated that power plant sightings cannot add additional background pollution levels in EJ communities. But the level of work and accomplishment and just impact since the People's Climate March has been amazing. If some of you could talk a little bit about how you've seen the movement change in the last few years.
If I may, Eddie, you and I were part of that table that led the organizing of the People's Climate March, and out of that emerges New York Renews and Climate Works for All, and a lot of different coalitions that have literally been not only getting policy passed in New York City and New York State, but have made it possible for us to operationalize what's called the Green New Deal. There's a question here about how the Green New Deal looks different on the city level, and I would say that it is actually even more place-based, right? When you're looking at the significant maritime industrial areas in New York City, you're looking at places where we could really change procurement policies and we could move money so that we start putting in the infrastructure that helps with the build out, so securing a transportation system that is going to be able to survive extreme weather events, that is going to make it possible for us to build carbon neutral spaces, that is going to make sure that we strengthen our waterfronts so that we're protected from extreme weather events. All of the things that a city needs to build in a lens that addresses climate change can happen in our industrial waterfronts. And those are places that will generate lots of jobs and will make it harder to displace local communities, will bring in small businesses and a supply chain that will make it possible for us to incentivize the economy. So all of that comes out of us coming together at the People's Climate March, getting to know each other, working with each other, and building on that momentum and bringing our creativity and our vision. And it isn't just aspirational. We have been doing it. We are doing it. We have passed legislation on the city statewide level, and our fingerprints are all over the national mandates that you're seeing coming out of the Biden administration. So I'll stop there in case anyone wants to add more.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sonal, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth put it very nicely, and I'll say, I think that one thing an overarching idea that's really coming out is how much environmental justice needs to be centered in the work, and I think the city is really grappling with that a lot, and that's been a very interesting part of the work, that we can really be, kind of like Elizabeth said, very neighborhood specific, very place-based with how we're advocating for changes we want to see in the city. Like, we're advocating for the East Harlem waterfront to be put back together because it's falling into the water and nobody cares. You hit 96th Street and it's very nice, but above that, it's, dilapidated. And we know why, that is an act of environmental racism. And so that's something that we work on specifically with the city, that is something that the city can achieve because we can be that specific. So I think that's something that's like really, at least to me, I'll even say like exciting about working in the city side of, Green New Deal work, is how specific we can be with the solutions that we want to see. Even with how we're building out solar panels, there's a lot of issues that come up in working with such a dense city building up solar that doesn't exist in like more rural areas. That are all really interesting questions that we get to really just, push forward to in the city. And then especially Local Law 97, which a lot of people did amazing work making that happen and passing that. And, I'm really excited to be able to be a part of the process now that we're determining how to make sure that Local Law 97 isn't a big handoff to building owners, isn't a handoff to real estate. How do we make sure that we're actually achieving these energy efficiency reductions in a way that's really specifically focusing on how do we do it for multifamily, low income, affordable housing, which is a question that all of our environmental justice groups are really seeking to answer in a way that's to me another kind of really exciting piece of Green New Deal work in the city specifically.
Thank you. I see we've been rejoined by Kashif, but I want to make sure, Lee, any responses before Kashif jumps back in?
Yeah, I'll just be really quick, but I would say, that march was such an amazing thing to see a lot of people that I worked with in the fracking community who come from very rural areas and felt very isolated in this fight. But I do think it was also a very important teaching moment, and I've seen a lot of progress, from people who come from very often rural white areas to understand, the environmental justice implications of what we're doing. And I think, I've seen more of that, and it's something that we need to see more of. But I do think that was a really important moment for a lot of people to really understand this broader movement, and just really appreciate Eddie and Elizabeth, both your leadership and that. And I think, it's something where we're seeing a lot of progress right now.
Thank you all so much. Always these panelists rock. And speaking of rocking, Kashif, you want to rock us in, brother? What do we got to hear from you?
Sure. I'll just close out by saying that we at the Office of Public Advocate are so inspired by the discussion of our expert matter panelists today. We are hoping that after today, the people of New York City can join the environmental justice movement to make our place, our city, our planet a better place to live, especially for our next generations to come. There's no doubt that we all need to collectively act now to make the necessary changes in policy and activism to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow. So I would say, let's unite and amplify our voices. Stay safe and healthy. Peace and love. And good night, everyone.
Peace.
Bye.